So welcome everybody. This is SharePoint Patterns and Practices, General SharePoint Development as SIG. And SIG basically means Special Interest Group. And this is the bi-weekly synchronous sync where we talk about all the other stuff in the SharePoint development except kind of client-side and JavaScript development. So there is a special interest group also for SharePoint framework because there's so much to talk about those stuff as well. So we're balancing out these, let's say, special interest groups. So you can actually decide which of these you actually want to join and which you want to avoid. And then on top of that, we also have the monthly community call, which is more like a summary around what has happened within the past month around the SharePoint development. Quickly, kind of repeating what I just said. So General Developer SIG is all about kind of a general SharePoint development topics, all of the other stuff than SharePoint framework. Obviously, we can touch SharePoint framework here as well in the questions as we move along on the topics. Today, we're going to talk about, for example, the announcements in the SPC. And yes, a lot of those SharePoint development announcements in the SPC were around SharePoint framework. So I'm going to quickly go through a few slides just to repeat the story. Because our session recording related on SharePoint framework from last week was only released 1 or 2 hours ago. So that was due to technical reasons. My traveling computer had some issues, and basically I needed to, we needed to wait until I got home to actually process the video and get it out into YouTube. Anyway, so this concentrates on the end-to-end solutions, provisioning, automation, BMP, PowerShell, and all of that stuff, or the related technologies. So today, as an example, we'll cover, Jax will go through the demo from SPC related on Microsoft Flow and PowerApps, which is obviously closely involved in the SharePoint context as well. But let's get back on that one in a second. AKMS SPPMP community, a great place to actually have a discussion on the SharePoint dev topics. So that is Microsoft Tech community, and you can always see people from Microsoft on those discussions as well if you need to have an opinion. And AKMS SP DevDocs are documentation platform. Now, opportunities to participate in the community. Today, we'll have demos, or I will talk like 15 to 20 minutes or 15 minutes, hopefully, or faster than that. And then Jax will do actually end-to-end the really long demo related on what he presented in SPC. Now, typically, we actually have quite also community demos in these calls. So that's absolutely one option as well. So if you have a cool technology, cool solution, and it doesn't have to be open source solution, you are more than welcome to actually use this call to demonstrate those things as well. It's all about showing a pattern, showing a model, showing how you utilize SharePoint as your developer platform. And you can easily ping me, Bert, Patrick, or somebody from the core team, and we'll set up you at the 10 to 15 minutes to do that. You can absolutely contribute in a GitHub. So GitHub/SharePoint is our SharePoint organization. We are actually gradually also extending some of the topics to BMP GitHub organization, but we'll talk about that one more in the upcoming monthly community call. And the key point also is to provide feedback. So please, please, please. And please remember to mute yourself as well. That was a loud noise. So let's actually make sure that people are absolutely muted in here. Yes, somebody was almost taking off. That's a good comment. So let's actually mute the people. Here we go. Now it looks pretty clean. Good. Now, so provide us feedback. So if there's something which you don't like, something where something isn't working, there's a bug, whatever, please use the social media channels, use the GitHub issue list, use whatever Microsoft support channels to let us know that we're able to fix that. Don't assume that somebody else has already reported your stuff, because we actually want to also know if multiple issues are running into the same issue or have the similar feedback that has a different meaning, then it's a one-off feedback from one person. Now, let's actually get moving on today's topic. So we'll kind of talk about a few announcements and updates on the SharePoint development side. Not actually that much new stuff, but what I wanted to do is a few slides on the recap of SPC 2018 SharePoint dev announcements, and then go to the Jax session. I will go them through relatively fast without a demos this time, and potentially on the next week on the SharePoint framework session, we can absolutely do live demos on certain topics which people have found interesting. But we want to make sure that Jax has a sufficient amount of time to go through his content. And we did do some of the SharePoint Conference demos already in the last week. So if you want to check those out, the recording is already in the YouTube channel. So you can actually have a look on that. So typical announcements, documentation and guidance, aka MSSP DevDocs. So our documentation platform, MSDN, is going to be shut down by end of June, is current estimate. And it's good to see that people are finding more and more the docs platform. So on May, we have roughly 870,000 views on the platform, which is really cool. So by end of June or July, we'll probably hit the 1 million views, which is really, really cool that people are actually finding this new location. From here, you can find the latest guidance, tutorials, links, our community call details, and everything else, so from one single location. The second thing what I want to remind everybody is the issue list. Right now, for the past few weeks, we haven't been really found a time to do triage on the issues, and I do apologize on that, and thank you for submitting those issues which we have been found. Typically we do 2 to 3 times in a week triage together with our engineers to figure out which of those issues are actually requiring our attention or our immediate attention. But this is really around for you to give the option of reporting an issue directly for SharePoint engineering, because we need to know if there are issues which are blocking you to be successful as well. Now, moving on things quickly, recap on the SharePoint 2018 conference announcement. So what were the new things from SharePoint 2018 conference? Because a lot of those sessions were not recorded. Only the keynote is recorded, and you can actually go and check it out from the, I think that link was shared in the Microsoft Tech community on a SharePoint space or SharePoint group. If somebody, by the way, has the link for the keynote recording, it's a great if somebody could actually share that in the windows, because the keynote is actually a really, really great summary on what were the announcements in the SharePoint Conference 2018. Now, in general, for the developers, we kind of divided the developer content or developer announcement in 4 different kind of sections. Number one of those sections is the all developers welcome. And already right now, we are in a nice situation. We're getting started on SharePoint, following up on our tutorials. It's roughly 10 minutes to set up your developer machine, and mainly because you need to run a few installers, and that's it. And after that, you can actually start creating a first web part, and it's less than 10 minutes actually that you will have your first web part available. Sure, there's a lot to learn, but there's a lot of guidance available as well. So if you can find the time to follow up on the tutorials and guidance and documentation, you absolutely can learn how to do that. Now, in future, as part of 1.5 release, we will add support for Yarn and BM. These are package managers, so you're able to actually use alternative package managers on top of NPM if you prefer to do so. If that's not definitely needed, but some people actually want to use Yarn or BMPM package manager, so that is absolutely supported in SPFX starting from 1.5. 1.5 will go out within a matter of days rather than weeks, but I can't give you an exact date at this point. The 1.5 will also have the Yeoman extensibility. This one will mean that we're able to start creating our own PMP Yeoman extension, which will then enable us to start providing stuff like Angular Elements templates natively from the Yeoman templates. More on that one within a few weeks, but this is a great thing as well for those who are interested on having the Angular support in the SharePoint framework. Absolutely possible. Is that really the recommended way? Not necessarily, because you can use any framework what you want. We in Microsoft use React, which is going to be pumped to React 16, and we provide reusable controls for React. Angular, absolutely great framework, and we're going to be supporting that. We actually technically support Angular already from SharePoint framework perspective, but Angular isn't really suitable for a web part or multi-widget UIs, and that's been really the challenge until release of Angular Elements or Angular 6.0. And we'll talk about that one within upcoming meetings more detailed. SharePoint 2019 will support also the modern experiences, so you can absolutely build an extension in SharePoint 2019, or you can use the same extensions, footers, and headers in the on-premises as well. And not to avoid any confusion, because I got this question in European Collaboration Summit yesterday, SharePoint 2019 will also support classic experiences, so you don't have to move to the modern if you don't want to. So you have that option to choose in SharePoint Online or in the on-premises as well. Even actually in SharePoint Online, you can even still today use classic OneDrive experience if you would prefer to do so. Again, other topics, simple governance. We released actually quite a lot of stuff on the governance side within the past 6 months after the Ignite, so there's a lot of cool stuff. The next big things will be tenant-wide deployment of extensions, so you're able from one centralized location control which of the extensions are available on which of the sites, and also for new sites and also for old sites. And this is really great capability. I quickly demonstrated that in the keynote recording, so you can actually check out the recording of the keynote in SBC to understand what it actually means. There's content security policy available, which gives you the possibility of limiting which are the domains from where JavaScript is allowed to be loaded. Really cool capability as well, because it adds additional layer of security. Isolated web parts, quickly explaining that one as well. If you don't trust somebody who has provided you an SBPKG file or a web part, like AC is giving you a SBPKG file, the AC is really shady guy. You never know what he's actually adding on those web part packages. So you actually then are able to isolate that web part to be running in an iframe. And that's really cool. So you're able to basically say that, oh, this web part, I'm not really sure. Let's actually put it in the more isolated sandbox, and then it's going to be executed over there. That's really cool capability. Additional web API management support and also broaden site design. So we will add additional set of actions as we move along towards the Ignite as well. Already today, there's quite a nice set of actions available in the site designs, and you're able to create them. Yeah, please don't quote me on the AC is a shady guy. Oh, he's on a call. Oh, this is getting recorded. No. Okay, anyway. Expose more UX surfaces is really important as well. So we do understand that in the modern experiences, the customization options are still quite limited. So we're adding additional content placeholders there. And these are like the content header and content footer. The difference between the existing top and bottom placeholders is that the content footer is actually last thing in the content. It is not floating on the top of the content like the existing content footer, existing button placeholder does. So a really important thing as well. Application page is really cool thing. It's not precisely single page application, but it basically gives you more flexibility as a designer or an application developer. You can create pages which do not support edit page capability for end users. And we'll clarify that more detailed as we move along within this journey towards Ignite. SPFX target Teams tab. So you can actually write one single code base as a web part, and you can use that in SharePoint and also as a Microsoft Teams tab. And that's mind-blowing. I think the demo, again, from the SBC keynote, my section where I showed the extensibility on SharePoint actually demonstrate that's pretty cool, pretty nicely. So you can take one web part and actually use that as a Microsoft Teams tab. So again, it doesn't matter which of the tools, is it SharePoint or is it Microsoft Teams your employees prefer to use, they can access the same application. And you as a developer, you do not have to worry about specific UI elements or frameworks depending on which service you're using in SharePoint in Office 365. And that's a really cool thing. One single way of implementing stuff, and it will work on all of the services in the future. Really cool stuff. And then the fourth thing on the where we are heading is the SharePoint Spaces. The demo from the SBC keynote was pretty impressive. Obviously, there isn't that many people who actually have HoloLens and they can play around with the SharePoint Spaces, but it's pretty cool idea of introducing virtual reality to the enterprises. And let's see how that one moves along and how many people we get involved in that community as well. By Ignite, we already promised that we'll create some of the community demos for Microsoft Spaces as well, or SharePoint Spaces as well. So we'll actually start this community sample work for that one as well. And I think the final thing from the sections is easily access data. So the Microsoft Graph scope management and accessing all of the Microsoft Graph scopes from a SharePoint framework will go to GA in production use. Dynamic data is a really important thing as well. You're able to share data between your SharePoint framework components in a pages. So web parts are communicating between web parts or with extensions, or they can actually access other data in the page as well. It's like contextually accessing user profile information and all of that. And then the final thing is Socket.io, and what it basically means that you're able to subscribe to events from a list using the Socket.io framework directly using a graph as well. Technically not graph, but graph-like APIs. So your web part can immediately react when somebody actually changes something in a list. You don't have to poll and double check, is there any changes on a list? You rather actually get a notification when something is said changes in a libraries or list. So really cool thing as well. Now, the next big thing in SBC, and I do apologize for rushing on this one, but I want to make sure that Jax has enough time for the demos as well. The big thing in SBC, big thing in the European Collaboration Summit, which we announced, and this still requires some level of a polishing, is the BMP starter kit for modern experiences. So we're really trying to help you and the community, our ISVs and system integrators and customers to understand what's possible with the modern experiences. So right now, if you go AKMS SP Dev Starter Kit, that will redirect you to a GitHub location where we have the starter kit available. It requires still additional level of documentation, additional testing, additional things, but it is already a pretty cool start. And many of our developers have been able to get it up and running in their tenants. Basic idea is following. We'll give you automatic provisioning of simple demo content in communication site, plus 2 additional other site collections which are associated to that communication site, which is automatically set to be a hub site. So you basically have this hierarchy of site collection automatically. And we give you also sample content, news and documents and presentations inside of those site collections as well. We give you, you can provision this to any tenant in a matter of minutes. So it takes roughly 5 minutes to complete the provisioning. And after that, you have up and running a cool portal, which is using web parts, custom web parts, out-of-the-box web parts, and there's a few extensions there as well. There's site designs and site scripts available automatically within your tenant. It's also using our custom theme, which the default theme is orange, and we've been getting this question quite a lot. Why orange? The orange is there because my favorite color is orange, so I do apologize if that's freaking out people. But you can easily flip the color from orange to something else. It's also a reminder on the times back in SharePoint 2010 beta 1 timeframe when suddenly SharePoint Blue was flipped to SharePoint Orange, and that was quite horrifying for those who actually saw that until we actually flipped it back to Blue. And this is an open source community-driven development model, and it is MIT licensed. And what it means is that you can pull this down, you can repackage that, you can use the code, you can use any of the assets inside of that GitHub repository in any way you want. You do not have to ask any permissions. You can just get up and running with this one and use them anywhere you want, anywhere you want, which is really cool. And it also sets the automatic site script and site design. So if you go to the SharePoint Home and start creating sites, you actually can see new site designs available there. All of the source code is available. All of the web parts, everything else, how they're being built is available in GitHub as well. So you're able to learn from this example. If you want, you can also just download the SPPKG file and test the web parts individually in your tenants. So you can use the web parts and functionalities individually into your tenants. You do not have to provision the whole 3 site collections or the whole demonstration as well. We'll add more documentation, more testing on this one as we move along to make sure that anybody can get it up and running within their tenants as well. Now, the next step for this one, like I said, documentation guidance. The following step is add more demo content, so more news material, more other material on the sites as well. And the final thing is really interesting on the slide. So by Ignite, we're planning to release a website where you can go sign in as a tenant administrator, and you're able to then change the custom theme file, change some of the default images which you have on this package, and then you're able to say provision. And that will actually then take the 5 to 6 minutes or whatever, but you will get everything ready for you to start demonstrating. So you're able to actually use this also as a pre-sales tool, as an example. So if you're a consultant and you have a pre-sales meeting tomorrow for, let's say, a random company which have a specific color which they want to use and specific images, you can go and kind of pre-create something for them to demonstrate what's possible on the SharePoint platform. And that's really, really, really cool. Cool. Good. That was a really quick summary. I do apologize. We will keep on repeating a lot of this stuff in the upcoming community calls. We'll keep you up to date on what's happening when something is coming out. The latest new thing really under development is more and more on the SharePoint framework side, because that's where the main investments are actually done. But there's a lot of kind of other stuff which we cover in this particular special interest group call, like the Microsoft Flow and PowerApps and site designs and end-to-end provisioning solutions. But today, let's actually concentrate now to the Jax and Jax demo from the SharePoint Conference in 2018, because that was really cool setup as well. And it's good to show what was actually announced to be available for you to take advantage. So Jax, you are still muted.
I'm here.
Yes, you are. Excellent. So feel free to take over the presentation. And I do apologize, I wasn't really paying attention what's happening in the Iron window. There were so many discussions over there. So I'll summarize and I'll go through the Iron window as we move along.
Excellent. Let me know if you can see my screen. It still says loading.
Yeah, my Skype is saying not responding, so it might be that I'll be back in a few minutes. Not again.
Cool. I think people can see my screen now. Excellent. So let me quickly go through some of the things, housekeeping. So just to announce some of the stuff that we have been doing in PowerApps and Flow and what we announced at SPC. So basically, this is a session I presented with my group engineering manager, Cyrus Balsara. So he's my guy. If I want to go make things happen, I have to go and talk to him. So that was his first presentation, public as a public speaker. So it was very interesting for him to come to SPC and deliver this talk, and he absolutely enjoyed it. So for folks that don't know, I'm Chucks. I'm one of the program managers in the SharePoint team working with VESA. I initially started my work with SPFX and web parts, so that's where I basically worked on revamping the entire dev platform along with VESA and others. You can reach me at Twitter or my blog. So if you're not following me, make sure you follow. So I'll be posting some awesome stuff with Flow and Power Apps and SharePoint in general. One thing I want to reiterate is that Power Apps and Flow are the tools you need for your business users and for building business process solutions in SharePoint. It's been roughly, I think, 2 years now since we said, hey guys, if you can move from InfoPath, make a plan for it. If you can move from SharePoint Designer workflows, make a plan for it. But I think this is the year I feel very confident that we have a strong set of tools with strong set of capabilities and features that basically map back to those two tools, so you can move your customers out from those to these new tools and the new, we call it modern way of working with the business processes. And since these are all not part of SharePoint, but kind of like having that independent roadmap with Azure, we're getting a lot of traction in how things get introduced and how things get managed. So we see a lot of innovation happening in both Power Apps and Flow platform. And that's a good thing, because those, when they happen, they automatically get to SharePoint very easily. So Microsoft Flow, for folks that don't know, is the new workflow engine platform that's built on Azure Logic Apps, and basically it's a designer, so business users can go build Flow on top of it. We have around 200 services, 200 plus services. I think last week they announced some connectors for the ServiceNow platform as well. So it's a growing platform. People, ISVs can publish their templates to Microsoft and have it available to users in Microsoft Flow website. So you can also build custom connectors for your enterprise and deploy it in your enterprise and use that in the Flow with actions. So there's a lot of opportunities here, especially for developers to go and make that migration and other things with respect to SharePoint Designer work with Microsoft Flow. It also has approvals, which is another big thing, which you usually is the one that you use in SharePoint Designer workflows. Today we have Flow Launch Panel. You can run the Flow as a user, which means that you can have anybody who's using the list or a library run a Flow. So for example, copy file or archive file and things like that. It's integrated with modern UI only. Classic, you can use the list, but there's no UI integration. There are some new features like request sign-off, which is basically available out of the box for users to do some lightweight approval process over a document or a list item. We also introduced new Flow actions. Item deleted trigger is now available. So if something gets deleted, it gives you the ID and the name or the title, depending on document or the list item from the list. And then we also introduced a new action called SharePoint HTTP action. This is a developer action, so you need to know the REST APIs and execute that with SharePoint. This opens up to many possibilities. We have so many API surfaces in SharePoint. We just can't build an action for every API surface. So we decided to release a HTTP action to unblock several enterprises that need those capabilities, so they don't have to wait for us to build those actions. Rather, they can go today and use the well-known REST APIs to go do those actions in SharePoint from Flow. Same with, so upcoming Flow integration, we have lots of cool stuff. I think you saw on the keynote demo, we showed the page approvals for communication sites. So now you can actually edit a page and submit for approval. We're going to be coming up with new suggested flows, starting with reminder flows. So if you do have date columns, we can remind users to create reminder flows based off of that date column. And you can imagine that expanding up to various levels. Like if you have a person column, maybe you want to remind something to that person when something changes on that item. So those kind of suggested flows is something we are building. And finally, we're going to be having approvals for joining hub sites. So this is one of the early feedback we received when we did some pilot testing and dog voting with customers, is that they want an approval process or a business process to be specific, right, when you join a hub. So we are working on that, and that's something also will be released soon. So these are some of the upcoming Flow integrations, and there's lots more. I can't talk right here now, but I think at Ignite we will see more stuff coming in. Custom forms with PowerApps, so that is the answer for kind of the form views. So if you want to have a new view or new item view, list item view, and edit item view, you can do that with custom forms with PowerApps now for list and libraries. So it's integrated again into modern SharePoint experience, not available in the classic. It gives you the full surface to go customize and flexible enough to add several other data sources if you do want to pull them in. So that's the power of custom forms. We also released PowerApps web part in targeted release. So if you do have an app built in PowerApps, you can now embed that directly in a SharePoint page using the PowerApps web part. It works in mobile, in your SharePoint mobile as well. And now you get the opportunity to bring in related data together and have it in your SharePoint site, regardless of whether that data is coming from SharePoint or it's coming from other different data sources in your organization. So with that, I'm going to go into my demo that we did. So we basically wanted to give a simple solution that will show certain capabilities of these different tools that we just were talking about. So we called it no code, and there was a lot of questions in Twitter like, why is it no code? It's not no code, it's low code. The reason being, in SharePoint, a code requires deployment and kind of some sort of approval. If you look at all our SPFX packages, you just can't deploy it and just use it without a tenant admin approval or a site collection admin approval. These things, what you're seeing here is basically, if you're a site owner and a list owner, you can go build custom forms and make it available for your business users. And that's the power of these tools. It is there for you to go build the things you want. And that's why we somehow the terminology came down to no-code solutions because you didn't have to deploy it. It's there for you to go work on it. So we'll see a simple interview feedback solution. I'm going to show you the demo, and I think we'll go through the flow and how we did build this. So let me open up. So yeah, somebody needs to be muted. I don't know who. Just making sure. I think, Vesa, if you can look into the questions, I think I would be able to, when after the call, we can address them separately.
Yeah, I'm still processing the questions during my notes, but yeah, and unmuting or muting people, so all good, all good.
Excellent. So here is our, oh, that's loud. Okay, here is our Contours Human Resources website. Here we have 3 lists. We have candidates, interview prep, and interview feedback. The candidates list is a simple list with information about the candidate, the email, and their CV attached to it, the resume. And then I have my interview prep list. So this is a list where basically the scenario is that the HR resource comes and creates a new interview prep item. So the interview is scheduled with 3 interviewers. And interview feedback is a list where you will see all of the interview line items coming up here. So people, the interviewers can go and give feedback on their specific candidate. So let's look at the flow. So initially, I'm logged in as Melissa. Melissa comes in and creates an interview prep item. And now you can see here, instead of the default SharePoint list form, we open up a highly customized form here, which is coming from PowerApps. And you can see some of the things I have here is I have the candidate, which is a lookup field to the candidate list. I have some title and sort of some subtitles to help users understand what's going on. I have 3 interviewers, first interviewer start time, second interviewer and their start time, and then finally the approver start time. And you can see some of the values have been set to default. So this one is today's date and 7 a.m. and this one is today's date plus an hour, so that you can accommodate, all the interviews should be after an hour by default, for example. And here I can basically search for the candidates, and you can see that as soon as I type, I got the candidates from my lookup list. I can select that. And notice how the first interviewer got enabled as soon as I selected a candidate. So that's something conditional stuff that you can do in PowerApps. And now I can here select the first interviewer. So I'm going to select Jeremy Massner as a people picker. Everything is coming from PowerApps. And then the second interviewer, I can say Dan Home. And then final interviewer, I'm going to say Melissa. So once I click save, that's going to create an item here. And basically what is going to happen behind the scenes is there's a flow getting kicked off, and that will create 3 items for the 3 interviewers that we created here. I'm just going to click edit. So 3 interviewers, Jeremy Massner, Dan Home, and Melissa Torres. So we're going to have 3 feedback items created in this list once the flow gets executed. There it is. There's our first item. And there's a reason I think it's just taking time because there's a lot of steps that I have in the flow. Still working, and here's the flow that's actually running right now. You can see that flow is running since a minute. There you go. So we got 3 items with the title for interview for that candidate, and then we have the interviewers. And not just that, if I switch to Dan Home or Jeremy Massner, here's Jeremy Massner, and go to his Outlook, I actually got a Skype meeting invite, an Outlook event with the Skype meeting and the Skype details for the interview for that candidate. And I also have the information about the candidate. I can even download the resume of that candidate. And I also have a direct interview feedback link. So when I click this, it directly takes me to that particular item for that feedback. Now, this is something interesting that you're seeing here. We'll come to this really soon. But the key idea is things got set up in the list, in the feedback list, and it created an event in the Outlook with all the details that I want to format with a Skype link and the candidate details and an interview feedback link so they can directly go click and give feedback. Now, one of the other things that happened along this with all these steps is that the flow also made sure that these 3 items are only accessible to these 3 interviewers. So it basically assigned unique permissions to these 3 interviewers. So when somebody comes to this feedback list, you don't want to see them all the interviews that is happening along the side. They just want to be focused on the things they have access to or they can give feedback to. In this case, I only have 1 candidate right now, but Dan Holm and Jeremy, who are kind of the interviewers, and Melissa, who's still an HR owner, Dan and Jeremy will only see their specific items in this list, while Melissa, who's the owner, can see every item on this list. So it basically broke all the permissions and unique permissions and set only to those interviewers that we need them to. So that's the flow. And now what happens is basically you're now set to give feedback and sort of rest of the stuff. Let me go and show you the flow for this step, and then we'll see what happens and how people give interviewers provide feedback. So here's the flow that just ran when a new item was added to the interview prep list. And what I'm doing here is basically there is a trigger, and after the trigger, I'm getting the details of the item. So here I get the details of the interview prep item. And then I get the candidate. Now here's a cool tip. Lookup fields are always pain to work with, right? Sometimes you need to write select and expand queries if you're doing C# and JavaScript code, and it's just doesn't give you everything out of the box, so there's a lot of work needs to be done. But here's a simple, neat trick that you can do with the flow. So in my interview prep list, when I created the list, along with when I set up the column, the candidate column, what I did was I said, hey, add email and ID as well to this list so that they are available in my view. Now, Flow takes advantage of this and sends the values when you get the item for the interview prep, if this actually loads right now, and will give you all of the values in the view, which means you will get the candidate email as the candidate title as a default, along with candidate email and candidate ID. Now you got the ID, so with that ID, you can now easily query the candidates list to get the candidate based off of that ID you get from the get item action. So it's a pretty cool trick. I think so that way you can basically easily query the lookup values from SharePoint list. I'm waiting for this to come up. For some reason, this is really slow. Anyway, so that's how I kind of get the candidate value as with whatever the candidate value associated with this list. And then I use the get attachments action, which is an action in SharePoint Connector, to get the attachment of that particular list item, in this case, the candidate. And then let's talk about the initialization variable later a little bit. The first step in the next is breaking the permissions and assigning unique permissions to those items that I created, right? So in order to do that, I want three. The way that you do in SharePoint is you use the add role assignment API. Now let me skip this user principal stuff, because I think once I show you what happens behind in the bottom, you'll know why the top we have the user principal. So I created scopes for first interviewer, second interviewer, and the approver interviewer. So the first interviewer, you create the first interview item. This means you're creating the feedback item that we saw. So now we will have the feedback item created. And then basically now we go and use the SharePoint REST HTTP action to use the SharePoint APIs, REST APIs, to break the item permissions on that list item that we created here. So I'm just going to load the REST. For some reason, it's taking time. There you go. So this is a HTTP action. So I'm executing against the site, giving a post, and now I have the well-known API that I think most of our SharePoint developers will be very familiar with this. Get the list, get item, and then break role inheritance, and then false is basically don't bring up all the permissions down to this list item from the list. So this breaks the inheritance. So immediately once you create this, the item is gone because it's the permissions are broken now. And then I basically create the first interview meeting using the Skype action. So there is a Skype action available that you can use, and you can create all the details and build all the stuff using the dynamic values from previous actions. And then we have the create first interview item, which is a create Outlook event action that creates the values based off of all the dynamic content we have, and it builds the email in HTML. So that's pretty much it. What happens? I do that for second interview and approval interview. And finally, I do set item permissions. So we create those items. I need to go and set the permissions on each of those list items to those unique permissions for those three users, the three interviewers. So I do an apply to each on the user principles, and that's where the top variables come in. So for each person, I need the SharePoint user principle, and this is how SharePoint has been working through the old days, right? Now there is like a shared dialogue and all those new APIs. We are working with that team to make this simpler, and we can build these things for you. But right now, this is the reason why we released the HTTP connector, HTTP action. So you can go do these things. We got lots of folks asking for this specific scenario, and this just gave us the freedom to go do the things that we want to do. That's why it's a bit complex right now. But if you know the APIs, it's pretty straightforward. So I get the user principles, and for each of the user principles, I need to go set the permissions for the three items. So I capture those user principles in a variable. Now everything, what I'm using here, as you can see, the header is JSON Lite. Now JSON Lite is something where it focuses to give you only the JSON result back, and not all of the metadata that usually the extra baggage that comes up with SharePoint when you call a REST API. So when I get this, the value is really, really simple, just the JSON value. And that basically looks like this, the body of that action and then ID. That's it. And I'll show you what it is from the flow that executed. You can see this in the output. But basically, if you query the body and then say, I need the ID of that, you will get the principal ID. And this is exactly similar to how you would go write a JavaScript, SPFX, REST API, and try to pass the resulting JSON output. Again, if you use the JSON Lite with no metadata, this will work. If you don't use that, then you have to traverse through underscore metadata and then D and some extra stuff that really is not required. It's just really hard. So now I have all the user principles in the variable. So all I do here is I initialize an array using the initialize variable action in Flow, and I create a user principles array. And every time I get the user principle back, I append that user principle to that array object. And then at the bottom, I basically go through loop those user principles. And now I use the SharePoint API to set item level permissions, which is basically your list item / role assignment / add role assignment. Principal ID is whatever the current item I have in the array, which is going through the loop. And role def ID, this is a constant that maps back to contributor rights. Now this is where This is again the same SharePoint stuff for the past, I don't know, 15 years. It's using those APIs, but they're all REST APIs, gladly. They're not ASMX APIs. So it uses the same old SharePoint stuff. So that's why this is not intended for business users. This is something for us who are power users and know REST APIs to go and basically do the things we want to do in SharePoint. Here again, I'm using no metadata just to make sure that if there are any results out back from this action, maybe errors or whatever, I get the light, JSON light, rather than all the metadata included in it. So I do that for the second feedback item I created and the third feedback item I created. So it's pretty straightforward now, and it does for 3 times for all of the 3 principles on that 3 list items. So that's the flow that got executed, basically created all of those items and sent an interview event request along with all the details with the candidate and the Skype interview event. So now what happens is that people can go and give feedback. But before that, if you look at this list, this is very boring. Like, this is something what we have been doing forever, right? We do have column formatters, so if you can use the column formatter and make this a little bit prettier, but it still doesn't give you the surface to go modify the view. So that's where Cyrus actually was his pet project, his hackathon project. Actually, he said, "Hey, I can do this in row. Why can't I can do this in column? Why can't I apply the same rule for the row?" So it becomes something where I can now customize the view completely. So here's a simple thing that we created. So we made all items view, and this is the view now you get if you go to that view that uses a row formatter. The row formatter is not available yet. We are still working on it. It's pretty early stage, but I think in the next few months we should have it available for you to go use it. It uses the same syntax as the column formatter. The things that you go build may be a little bit different, but everything else is exactly the same. You can see what we did here is basically we said, oh, I'm going to build a div. It's not beautiful. And that's another thing. We want to make it easily fabric and all those stuff. You can see I have the title. I have all of the details. I said interview in progress, interview feedback, contact interviewers, contact candidates, something that applies to my business process. And then I have the interview feedback. Here again, if I switch my view to all items, you can see I have a very good view for focusing on that candidate. And I also have give feedback button that comes up to that particular user that logged in so they can care about the things they want to do. So let me go to Jeremy. And let's see. Okay, so now this is cool. So now I can go to my interview feedback list. So I'm logged in as Jeremy here. And you can see now I have the give feedback button, but I can't basically Dan Home and Melissa. I don't see those here. Melissa is logged in, so I see Melissa giving feedback. So I'm going to give my feedback. I'm going to say no hire, not good. Let's put just one thing, and you can see now it basically put red instead of green. And I got an email as well that said, hey, basically Jeremy gave feedback, and here's the decision and here is the message. Oh. Okay, you get the idea. Here it is. So then Dan, so let me go to Dan, do the same thing. I'm going to say hire. Why am I seeing Jeremy Messner? Okay, something happened.
You are the PM of this functionality. You should know. Just kidding. Just kidding.
I do know, but it's a secret.
Indeed.
So Dan now gives a no hire decision. So there it is. And then let's come back to Melissa. So I got an email again. And Melissa is the approver. So you can see final approver and stuff like that. That is very specific to, let me just refresh this page just to, there you go. And I'm going to say I'm the final approver. I don't care what others have done, whether they decided to hire or not. But I'm going to, yeah, there's some bug here that I think that's getting fixed, which basically brings up the old values. There you go. So I'm going to say hired, and now Melissa has approved. So if I go to the emails, you can see I get 2 emails, interview feedback and candidate Alice is hired. So that's how it closes the loop to finally say the candidate is hired. And one thing that also happens up, if you go to the interview prep list, it also now, if you switch the view, it would have updated that to say from interview in progress to hire, and we have it green. So the row formatters are, I'm not going to go into deep because we don't have time for this today, but basically it uses the same construct that the column formatters use, but this time it's working against the view. So that's how it is applied to the view, and everything else. For example, if you're setting a background color, you can see here I have the operator if the condition is equal to higher, then I set a different color. And if the operand is no higher, if the decision is no higher, then it's this color, if not no color, right? And this dollar decision is the way you access the column that is available in your view. And similarly, if you look at the things that we did for the final approver, in the text we said, okay, in the children, you're kind of like building your divs. If you get the title, and after the title, if this person is approver, true, because the is approver is a Boolean value, and we are just checking if approver is true, then append this final approver string. And it goes on to building. Again, this is something we're still working on. Some things may be simplified, some things may be just the way we will have to tell how people build it. Initially, it is JSON. This is the quickest way we can get out the door. But I think our option is to make this much more accessible to business users and have UX-driven way of building these things. But right now, this is what we are trying out to see what are all the different things we can do, and then later bring this into the product. And the give feedback button is also interesting, because I think that's the, where is the give feedback? There it is. The give feedback button, which you saw, only comes up for that particular item. So this is what we do. The display property of the give feedback has a check to see if the me, which is the column, is the interviewer.email, is both are equal, then basically you kind of get the give feedback button. If not, you don't get the feedback button. That's how the give feedback comes up to a very specific set of people. So that's the row formatter. And if I quickly go into the flow, here's Melissa. The flow that got kicked off for every time when somebody did some changes to the list is interview feedback updated. Now, here's a cool trick. Every time, there's one trigger called when an item is created or modified. So this is the trigger you have to use for both item creation and modified if you want to get the modified version. There is a trigger called when an item is created. That won't give you the modified triggers, but this will give you the alerts for the modified as well. So once it's modified, get the interview item. And the way that I'm checking this right now, whether this is a modified or a new item, is basically I'm checking the created date time is not equal to modified date time. If they are not equal, then I know this item has been modified. So this is a simple trick. I know we can make this simpler. Right now, this is what we have got. There's a whole history around this thing. But once this is updated, right, I send an email to update the interviewers on, hey, someone gave a feedback on the candidate and here's a hiring decision value. And then I also check if this is coming from an approver, because if Melissa approves, I have to go and do certain things. So I'm checking if the email is equal to the approver email, right? If the person email modified by. If it is, then is the value hired? If the candidate is hired, if someone is an approver, and if they changed the decision to hire, then I need to go do a bunch of things. I go and need to set the interview prep item to hired, because I need to close the loop there. And then I have to send an email so that people know that the candidate is hired. So that's this flow. So it's pretty neat. Like, it breaks down to different set of conditions. And now basically, you know, the 3-step flow that you have, it's only basically 3 steps, but if you break down, it's actually going into different levels based on the conditions you build. Again, here we didn't use any of the HTTP action. Here we just used all of the default flow actions available to us with some conditions so that we can check and ensure that people are able to do the right things in the flow. So this was the demo that I did at SPC 18. And one thing I did not show is custom forms. I think we have very little time.
Yeah, we have quite a few questions on the pipeline as well, but either way.
Yeah, but I'm going to quickly show, because I think this is something very important. You can do a lot of things in Power Apps. You can build some awesome stuff, complicated stuff. Trust me, it's difficult to build those things in Power Apps right now. So the thing that you should do or concentrate with your customers is, what are the simple things we can change, especially with custom forms. If you're going and building an app, a standalone app that connects to SharePoint, multiple data sources, you've got a lot of options. You can make some awesome UI there. But custom forms are meant to be kept simple so that you can build the things you need to build and give the things very quickly so users find it very relevant to enter the data, right? So here you can see that I split my screen to basically 3 screens instead of 1 screen. So I have a new edit and view screen. In the new screen, I have basically the items that we saw in the demo. You can see everything is disabled by default. So Power Apps uses this concept called data card for every control that appears in the form. So this is an interviewer control. You have the form, and in the display mode is where I actually go and write the condition. If the candidate value, so if my candidate data card value is blank, then I make it disabled. Else I change the mode to edit. So that's how it switches back and forth between enabled and disabled modes. The same thing for the first interview item, the second interview item. If you look at it, I would have just switched that back to first interviewer value dot selected. So it's a pretty stable one. And then for the default values for the date, you can see I have default, and basically it says text, hour, now, and then localized to EN US. So that way it actually puts the default value, and for the next one it's basically +1. So these are simple things. You can put some colors, add some titles and whatnot, and give them some simple forms and to get started with. Some are complex, I do get it, but I think to get started with Power Apps, this is a nice little way to focus on the simplicity rather than the complexity that you want. And you can have some complexity here with respect to how the control needs to be displayed, especially if you split this into 3 views. I will tweet a link on how to separate these 3 views. There's a blog post from the Power Apps team. I'll tweet that as soon as this call is done so that you'll get an idea of how to do that from a single 1 form to the 3 forms. So that's my demo.
Jax, if you have
Yeah.
a few minutes, let's actually go through a few questions.
Okay.
One comment, by the way, on the governmental cloud, there was quite a lot of questions there. When will this be in governmental cloud? Based on information from Tom, thank you, Tom, for sharing, Microsoft Contact said by end of this calendar year. So it's not available yet. But to be honest, me or Jax are not the people who would know that. Now, Jax, following is for you from Brian Russo. I just started pretty early on the discussion. Will there be any way to export SharePoint integrated Power Apps? And this was quite question which was on the Iron window quite a lot.
Yeah, so we are working on that. We are trying to basically give you a way to export a list. And if that list has a flow attached to it or a custom form attached to it, we will export that as well. And actually, when you import back the list, when you create a list from that package, it will create everything. This is something we showed in the keynote as well. If you had seen the keynote, there was like a new list wizard, and it said include flows and all those stuff. It's a work item that is crossing the PowerApps Flow and pretty much the Business Apps group and SharePoint, so that we have a consistent package format for all of these tools.
Cool. Yeah, and Akel was still on the call. Good. Akel asked exactly the same question. The following question was from Benoit. Can we create a flow that is common for many sites?
Flow common for many sites. Right now, no. A flow needs, you can, so there are two ways to build this. I would say a different way to build this. The default SharePoint triggers are basically only available to a list or a library. They can't be associated with multiple lists or multiple library. You'd have to run, you have to duplicate the flow and basically change the trigger to point to the list or the library that you want. And that will end up creating, if you want 100 lists, then 100 flows. The other way, the complex way to create this, if that is a real business need, is to create a trigger that create a flow that uses a recurrence trigger that runs every minute or every hour, and then polls SharePoint for new items. You can use the HTTP REST action for that, and then get back the items to see if there are anything new. That's the kind of way how flow has it associated with a list. We don't have a flow associated with the site.
Yeah. Good. Just coming back on, Rahul is asking, can only PowerApps form be exported? And I think right now it would be the list exporting, at least as a step one, right?
Yeah, right now we don't have, PowerApps doesn't have the capability to export a form. I think they are working on that. We have got the request because you can export an app, you can save it, bring it back and change everything that you want. This is not something available in Form because Form is not an app. Form is a special thing that's built for SharePoint and other constructs in PowerApps. So that's why they don't have that yet, but they're working on it.
Yeah. And Benoit is commenting also that there should be a way to register an existing Flow or Logic app as an enterprise solutions. And yeah, sure, one step at a time. We do understand.
And that will be that'll be the case for all the package export and import and doing all this stuff. Yeah.
Now, Stephen still had a question. Does the custom Power App form come with a list if it's saved as a template with data? Answer is no. That's not the case. If you're using the classic save list as a data capability, save list as an STP file, the answer is absolutely no.
Right, but the save list, even though it's available in online, you can't import that and create a list template and create list based off of that. So
yes.
Yeah,
that's true. Dean was asking more administrative question. Any plans of AdFlow and Power Apps for the service health page? And I think somebody said that it's potentially there already. If I missed the discussion, just to share that. And then there was a comment from yours. Are Power Apps web forms supposed to be working inside of Power Apps web part? Tried that, but with no luck.
Yeah, so custom forms have special things like, edit form, new form, and stuff like that that needs to work. So the web part does not handle it. Web part is basically for the apps. We are building a list forms web part that will specifically handle the user scenarios for the custom forms. I mean, you can try it, but it's very difficult. It's hacky because you need to know what form you need to load and what list and all those stuff. So, yeah.
Okay, that was all what I collected. I was looking into our messages as well. I think that's it for now. And anyway, we have 4 minutes on the on top of the
Yeah, and I do want to add one thing. If so, I'm going to be doing this regularly, showing stuff in Power Apps and talk about Flow. If you guys have some demos that you want to share with us, let Vesa know. We will have that in the community call and basically see what solutions you guys have built using Flow and Power Apps.
Yes, absolutely. So, and let's be super clear. Obviously, we want Power Apps and Flow to be part of these calls as well. But this is not going to be transformed just for Flow and Power Apps. No, it's just making sure that's clear as well. But like once a month or twice a month, why not? Actually, this is really, really close part of SharePoint. And then we'll talk about the site designs and themes and all of the other topics in this call as well. Now, Ekel, you offered already me. Please send me or Jack's an email. Jack's email might be slightly, or sorry, please send me an email or Bert Janssen an email and we'll get you scheduled based on the time what you need, or private message in Microsoft Tech community or in a Twitter or whatever. So we can actually have that discussion and then there. But next general SharePoint Developer special interest group call is on June 14th, and the next SharePoint Framework special interest group call is on 1 week from now, the 7th of June. But that's it for this one. The URL where you can find all of the documentation information, community call details, options, open source projects, everything else is the AKMS SP BMP, so our community channels for SharePoint development. But thank you everybody for watching. Thank you for your comments. Thank you for your feedback. Thank you, Jax, for great demos, brilliant demos once again. And like Jax said, we will absolutely keep on doing this Flow and Power Apps content in here as well. Thank you, everybody. Please keep the feedback coming. Bye-bye.